Hey friends, welcome to Midweek. Can you believe that February is already here? It seems like January took forever, and I don't know if it's just me or if everybody feels that way, but to me, January just went on and on and on and on. And now, boom, here we are, February, and it seems like the rest of the year just kind of coast on by, doesn't it? And so, being that it's February, I figured we're going to start a little mini-series, being that it's the love month, and talk about relationships. More importantly, talk about marriage. And I don't know where you are, how long you've been married, but marriage can sometimes be extremely complicated, right? And you and I, our marriages, it's the picture that God has put into our life to show other people what it looks like with Jesus and the church. Our marriages symbolize the relationship between Jesus and the church. And I just want to ask you straight up, how are you doing with that? When outsiders look into your marriage, when outsiders see the way that you interact with your spouse, whether it's your husband or your wife, do they see Christ in that? Do they see a model that God wanted the church to be about, right? A model where they see the love of Christ mixed with the beauty of the church. Are they seeing that respect with one another? Are they seeing the honor and dignity that go into it? And my fear, friends, is that we're falling short. And I'm not just talking to you, I'm looking at myself too, because everything that we're talking about tonight, I am completely guilty of. And marriage throughout the entire Bible is a huge deal to God. We talk about it in the Old Testament. We talk a lot about it in the New Testament. Jesus himself has a lot to say about it. And marriage is just really a big deal. But friends, if we're honest, we don't look at marriage as that big of a deal anymore. And here's how I'll show it to you. Because when you dated your spouse, look at all the time that you spent. Before getting married, of course, right? When you were dating, look at all the time that you spent together. We're talking hours upon hours, a full-time job's worth in 1 week you spent with your girlfriend or boyfriend at the time, preparing for a moment where you're sharing life together. Because that's why we date, right? We date because we're looking for that person to share our life with forever. So when you're dating, you're spending time together. It's just natural. What happens? The problem is when we become married, all of a sudden we grow distant. And that what should have been a group thing, a togetherness, a unity, ends up being something that we fear we kind of go into it alone. And that's scary because I see a lot of marriages fail often, all the time, especially in the church. And a lot of the reason behind that is because one spouse just feels utterly alone. And that's not what God designed for marriage. And so what happens is when people look from the outside and they see our marriages and they see all the conflict that arises, all the arguments that come in place, all the infidelity that happens, they see that oneness being broken to where when they start looking at their relationship with Christ, they don't know how in the world they can have a strong relationship or how God could love somebody so much, how Christ could be a groom to the bride, which is the church, without there being all this broken chaos. Because the only example they have is you and I. And so I want to read something to you, and then we're going to talk about it. This comes from Ecclesiastes chapter 4, and it doesn't have anything really to do with marriage except for this big point of being one, right? And we're going to start with verse 8. It says, "There was a man all alone. He neither had a son nor a brother. There was no end to his toil, yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For who am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business." But here we go. All right, here's verse 9. "Two are better than one, because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up, but pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. And also, if two lie together, they will keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone?" See, marriage is supposed to be this unity of two people becoming one, but still being in unity with one another. And so often our marriages start to take a back seat where we start to drift apart, where really the only conversations we start having with one another are bills, family matters, schedules, things of that nature. And statistically, we spend less than 2 hours a week in meaningful conversation with our spouse. Does that not baffle you? And better yet, does that not bother you? That less than 2 hours in a whole week we're spending in meaningful conversation. Put all the other stuff aside. Put the schedules aside, work aside, the busyness of the day. Put all that aside. Meaningful conversation, you one-on-one with your spouse. How are you doing with that? Because what happens is without that communication, we start to feel like we're alone, to the point where this passage really starts to make sense. Where how can one person keep themselves warm, right? If I fall down, who's there to pick me up? And what I want my marriage to be like is a partnership to where when I am down, I do fall, my wife's there to pick me up. And when she falls and she's down, I'm there to pick her up. Because when she hurts, I hurt. And when I hurt, she hurts. And that's the unity that comes about being one together. And so I want to give you 3 challenges that's going to help you start to communicate better with your spouse, with meaningful conversation. The first one is very easy. You can even start doing it tonight. And that's this. Sit at the dinner table with no distractions. I know that's a foreign concept in our culture today because we have dinner that's scattered throughout our households, right? The wife may be eating dinner, standing by the dishwasher, doing dishes. Dad's watching TV after a long day at work. And so he just wants to eat his meal in front of his favorite show. And the kids are all in their rooms eating their meals. And it seems like the American food, the American table, the household no longer sits at the table. And we've broken up the sanctuary that is the dining table. And that's really scary. Right? Because at the dining table is where everybody can start talking about real things. Your children, your spouse, and it goes beyond just the simple, non-meaningful conversations like work and school and business and schedules and all that stuff. It gets deeper, right? So even tonight, you can start by having your distractions away from the table. You all sitting there enjoying dinner together as a family. The phones are put aside, and even when it rings, there's voicemail. I don't know if you realize that about your phone, but it has voicemail. Let that baby ring and just enjoy the time that you have with your family, specifically your spouse. The second challenge I want you to do is this. I want you to find a time throughout the week, whether it be an hour, 2 hours, or maybe even 30 minutes if this is really foreign to you, and just shut the TV off for that amount of time and just spend talking to your spouse. Whatever time that looks like. 30 minutes at least, but maybe an hour, 2 hours, whatever fits you and her or you and him. However that works for you, find that time, schedule it in your week and say, you know what, tonight, no TV, it's just you and I. And we're going to talk about life. We're going to talk about our goals, our dreams, our visions, the things that we used to talk about when we were dating one another. And that's the third challenge, is I want you to date your spouse again. Start dating your spouse again, even if it's once a month. Find something where you can do together that's not sitting in a movie theater, because that's an easy date, right? That's a cop-out. And it's easy because, guys, we don't really have to communicate there. We could just sit and watch a movie together, maybe have dinner, and that part we have to talk a little bit. But go out and do something meaningful together. Go on a hike. Go on a bike ride. Go on a walk. Go do something. You don't even have to pay to go do something. Just enjoy a day date with your spouse. And I guarantee you, if we start to do these things together, the marriage that we carry is going to start looking a lot better. The oneness, the unity, the completeness that God has with the church is going to start looking more familiar, because we're going to start seeing these marriages throughout our small communities, throughout our congregation. And so when people look at my marriage, I strive to be there. But friends, if I'm honest, I fail at this all the time. But we don't have to. Let's try these challenges and see where we go. And hopefully you guys will have a great week. I know it's going to be uncomfortable to try to do these things, especially if you're not used to it. But I promise at the end, it's all going to be worth it. Have a great week, guys, and we'll see you next week.